Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into a case this really sent chills down my spine just reading about it. It's the story of Bruce Mendenhall, a long-haul trekker turned, well, something much darker. And, you send over this whole stack of articles and reports, and it's a wild ride.
Yeah, Mendenhall's case, it's one of those that really gets under your skin, you know? I mean, on the surface, he's just this regular guy living an ordinary life, but underneath, well, let's just say there's a whole lot more going on, and that's what we're going to try to unpack today. How did this seemingly average guy end up, well, becoming the monster that he did?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? I mean, he lived in Illinois with his wife and kids, just like anyone else. How do you go from that to what he did? It's hard to even imagine.
It is. It is. And, that's what's so fascinating about this case. There's no, clear-cut origin story for his crimes, you know? No obvious trauma in his past, no red flags. It just makes you wonder, what was the tipping point? What flipped the switch, you know?
Yeah, it's unsettling, just thinking about it. It's like, how many people like that are out there living these completely normal lives right next door to us, and we have no idea. So how did this guy finally get caught?
Well, it all started in 2007 at a truck stop in Nashville, Tennessee. Detective Sergeant Pat Postiglione, he was the one who cracked the case open. Sharp guy, really knew his stuff. He noticed that Mendenhall's truck, it matched surveillance footage from a recent murder at the truck stop.
So it was just like pure luck that led to his capture.
Well, I wouldn't say just luck. It was luck combined with some really incredible police work. I mean, Postiglione, he could have easily dismissed Mendenhall, just another trucker passing through, but something about him, it just didn't sit right.
And what they found inside his truck, it must have been just, I mean, I don't even know what to say. Shocking, horrifying.
It was. It was. They called it the truck of horrors, and for good reason. I mean, we're talking bloody clothes, a whole collection of IDs, knives, a rifle, handcuffs, even sex toys. They cataloged over 300 items from that truck, and the most disturbing part, DNA from 5 different women.
5. Oh, wow. So right then and there, investigators knew they were dealing with something way bigger than just a single murder.
Yeah, it was like opening Pandora's box. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a mobile murder kit. It painted a pretty clear picture. This wasn't a one-off thing. This was a serial killer.
And that's where the case it gets even more complicated, right? You mentioned earlier how his job, the fact that he was a trucker, how that played a role in all of this. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, think about it. Mendenhall, he was basically a ghost, drifting from one truck stop to the next, all across state lines. And truck stops, they're often anonymous places, right? People come and go. They rarely form any lasting connections. It was the perfect environment for someone like him to blend in, to avoid scrutiny.
That makes sense. I mean, witnesses, they probably only had like fleeting glimpses of him, right? They might not even remember his face, let alone his license plate number. It's a lot of missed connections.
Exactly. And then you add to that the fact that he on targeted women who were, well, living on the margins of society, women whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed or investigated. It's a recipe for a killer who can operate under the radar for years.
So how did investigators even begin to connect the dots? Were there any specific victims or cases that stood out early on?
Yeah, there were a couple that really jumped out. Sarah Herbert and Samantha Winters. Both women were found murdered at different truck stops in Tennessee, and both of them had histories of prostitution. Those were the first 2 cases that were definitively linked to Mendenhall.
And then there was that other victim, Karma Purpura. I was reading about her case, and it seems like it took years to solve.
It did. Karma Purpura's case, it's a fascinating one because it really highlights the power of forensic science, specifically mitochondrial DNA analysis. They found her blood in Mendenhall's truck, which linked him to her disappearance back in 2008, but her remains, they weren't found for another 4 years. It wasn't until 2025 that they finally had enough evidence to convict him of her murder.
So they actually used a single hair they found in his truck to connect him to Karma Purpura. That's incredible.
It is. It's a testament to the dedication of law enforcement and just how far forensic technology has come. And then there's the case of Lucille Greta Carter. Her murder, it was particularly brutal. She was found in Alabama nude with a plastic bag taped around her head.
Oh, God. Okay, this is where it gets really disturbing. Were they able to link Mendenhall to this murder as well?
Well, while the circumstances were similar to his other crimes, they weren't immediately able to connect him to Carter's murder. But her case, along with, the growing pile of evidence, it opened up a whole new chapter in the investigation. They started looking into unsolved cases across multiple states, trying to find a pattern that matched Mendenhall's MO.
And that's when things get really, really complicated for you.
Absolutely. Trying to piece together a serial killer's movements across multiple states, it's like trying to solve a giant, gruesome jigsaw puzzle.
So tell me, where do they go from there? How did investigators begin to build a case against Mendenhall for these other potential murders? So they're looking at all these unsolved cases, right? And trying to connect Mendenhall to them. I mean, how do you even begin to do that? What kind of patterns did they to see?
Well, one thing that jumped out pretty quickly was that a lot of these potential victims, they were found near major trucking routes, which, I mean, makes sense given his job, right? But it did help them narrow down the search a bit.
Okay, so they're focusing on cases that intersect with his known routes. Were there any cases where they thought, like, this has got to be him?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There was Deborah Ann Glover. She was a prostitute in Atlanta, and she was found murdered near a motel. And they were able to place Mendenhall in Georgia around the time she died. Then there's Sherry Drinkard from Gary, Indiana, found in a snow embankment. And, oh man, then there's really chilling. Tammy Zywicki, she was a college student, disappeared from Interstate 80 in Illinois, and was later found stabbed to death.
God, that's awful. Any other victims they suspected he might be connected to?
Yeah, there were a couple more. Robin Bishop, she was a prostitute found run over at a truck stop in Tennessee. And Belinda Cartwright, a hitchhiker, run over at a truck stop in Georgia. And this is interesting. There was a composite sketch of the suspect in Cartwright's case based on what witnesses said, and it really resembles Mendenhall. It's pretty striking.
So many women and so many tragic stories. It's scary to think about the danger that's out there on the highways, especially for women who are vulnerable, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's important to remember that most of his victims, they fit a similar profile, right? Young women, vulnerable women, often involved in sex work. And these women, they were transient themselves, moving from place to place, which unfortunately makes it even harder to establish a pattern, to connect the dots.
It's heartbreaking. It's like these women were already living these really precarious lives, and then they cross paths with someone like Mendenhall who just preys on that vulnerability.
It's true. And that's why, I think it's so important to understand the social and economic factors that contribute to this kind of vulnerability. So we can work toward creating a safer environment for everyone. It's not enough to just catch the killers. We need to address the systemic issues that make people targets in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. We need to be thinking about prevention as much as punishment, right? It's a reminder that we can't just focus on catching the killers. We need to fix the systems that create the conditions for these crimes to happen.
Exactly. Now, there's one more case I want to mention, Jennifer Smith. She was a prostitute found murdered in Tennessee, and initially everyone thought Mendenhall was responsible. But DNA evidence later linked her murder to another serial killer, John Wayne Boyer.
Wow, that's a real twist. It makes you realize how complex these investigations can be. It's not always a straight line to justice.
Yeah, you're right. It's a good reminder that, even with all the forensic advancements we have, these cases are rarely straightforward. It's all about piecing together evidence, following every lead, and sometimes, just accepting that the answer might not be the one you expected.
Okay, so we've talked about the victims, we've talked about the evidence, and we've talked about the challenges of the investigation. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Mendenhall himself. I mean, what kind of person does this? What kind of person could commit such horrific acts? Was there anything in his past that hinted at this kind of, this darkness inside?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that has puzzled investigators and criminologists for years, really. I mean, on the surface, Mendenhall was a seemingly ordinary guy, married with kids, no significant criminal history, held down a steady job.
I mean, it's just hard to wrap your head around. How can someone with a seemingly normal life, be capable of such brutality?
It's almost like there was this disconnect, between the persona he presented to the world and the reality of his inner world. He was very good at compartmentalizing, at keeping his dark urges hidden from view.
God, it's a chilling thought. I mean, it makes you wonder how many other, Mendenhalls are out there just hiding in plain sight, blending into everyday life.
And that's why, it's so important to be aware, to pay attention to the subtle signs, the red flags that might indicate someone is struggling with these dark impulses. Of course, not everyone who exhibits these traits is a serial killer, but it's important to be vigilant, right?
For sure. Knowledge is power, right? The more we understand about the psychology of these individuals, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and our communities. So what are some of those red flags? What should we be looking for?
Well, one common trait among serial killers is this fascination with violence, often starting at a young age. This could be cruelty to animals, fire starting, or other destructive behaviors.
It's almost like a slow buildup of darkness, you know, just simmering beneath the surface.
Exactly. And as they get older, these urges might escalate to more disturbing behaviors like voyeurism, stalking, or obsessive fantasies. They often have this deep need for power and control, and they seek out victims who they can easily dominate.
It's like a twisted game they're playing, right? Testing the limits of their control over other people. And in Mendenhall's case, the transient nature of his job would have provided him with so many opportunities for that. Meeting new people, moving from place to place, always one step ahead of the law.
Absolutely, the open road, the anonymity of truck stops, the constant movement. It's like a predator's paradise. He was able to, blend in, disappear into the background, making it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to track his movements.
This is where Mendenhall's case gets really interesting, wouldn't you say? I mean, his truck, it wasn't just a mode of transportation. It was like an extension of his dark desires, right? We talked about that collection of over 300 items they found in his truck. Was there anything else in that collection that stood out to investigators?
Yeah, you're right. It's more than just a case of a truck driver who happened to be a serial killer, right? The trucking aspect is it's like woven into the fabric of his crimes. And you're right to highlight the truck of horrors again, That's where the real story unfolds. What's really fascinating here is that, beyond the weapons and personal items, they found these notebooks filled with Mendenhall's writings. And in those writings, you really start to get a glimpse into his psyche, his motivations, his twisted worldview.
Okay, now this is where it gets really creepy. What kind of stuff was he writing about? Was he detailing his crimes, fantasizing about future victims?
Not exactly. He never explicitly confessed to the crimes in his writings, but there were definitely some disturbing patterns. He often wrote about his hatred for women, his feelings of powerlessness and inadequacy. It's almost like he was using those writings as a way to process his rage, to justify his actions to himself.
That's chilling. It's like a window into the mind of a killer. And it makes you wonder, if they hadn't caught him when they did, how many more victims might there have been? Did investigators have any sense of how long you've been operating? It's a scary thought to think you might have just kept going.
It is, yeah. Based on the evidence they had, and the timeline of the confirmed victims, it seems like he could have been active for several years before his arrest. It's impossible to say for sure how many victims there might have been, but it's safe to say he was a prolific killer.
That's terrifying. So knowing all this, what happened next? He was arrested. They found all this evidence. What was the legal process like for a guy like Mendenhall?
Well, I mean, given the number of potential victims, right, and the fact that his crimes they crossed state lines, it was a really complicated legal battle. He was initially tried and convicted in Tennessee for the murders of Sarah Holbert and Samantha Winters. He received life sentences for both.
So at least there was, justice for those two women.
Yeah, but the pursuit of justice, it didn't end there. He was then extradited to Indiana to face trial for the murder of Karma Purpura, which, like we talked about earlier, took years to finally, get a resolution.
And remember, this whole time, he's maintaining his innocence, claiming he wasn't a serial killer, even with all this evidence against him.
Yeah, his denial, it's actually pretty common in these types of cases. It's almost like a defense mechanism, a way to distance themselves from the horrific nature of what they did. But I mean, in the end, the evidence, it spoke for itself. In 2025, he was finally convicted of Karma Purpura's murder too.
So after all these years, all the investigations, all the legal stuff, he was finally held accountable for his actions.
It was a long and tough process, but in the end, it really shows the persistence of law enforcement, and their commitment to getting justice for the victims and their families.
Yeah, for sure. This whole deep dive into Bruce Mendenhall, it's been both, fascinating and disturbing. It's a reminder that evil can be lurking anywhere, even in the most unexpected places.
And it really underscores the importance of being aware, being vigilant and communicating. We need to pay attention to those subtle signs, the red flags that might indicate someone is struggling, and we need to speak up, report anything suspicious, no matter how small it might seem.
It's about creating a culture of safety, right, where we're all looking out for each other, especially those who are the most vulnerable.
I couldn't agree more. Mendenhall's case, it's a tragic reminder of the work we still have to do.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the nature of Mendenhall's job, being a truck driver and how that helped him commit these crimes. What are some of the things we can do as a society to to kind of address the risks that are inherent in that industry?
That's a really important question. I think we need to start thinking about ways to improve communication and collaboration between law enforcement, right? Across state lines. I mean, a national database of unsolved crimes, real-time alerts that flag potential connections. Those could be really impactful.
Yeah, it's like building a safety net so these predators can't slip through the crack.
Exactly. And we also need to, empower the truckers themselves, the truck stop employees, to be more vigilant, to report anything suspicious, to look out for each other.
It's about, creating a sense of community on the road so these types of crimes are less likely to happen in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. And we can't forget about the victims either. We need to be addressing those systemic issues, the poverty, the addiction, the lack of access to resources, all the things that contribute to their vulnerability.
It's about, working toward a society where everyone feels safe and supported no matter their circumstances.
Exactly. Mendenhall's case, it's a tragic reminder of the work that still needs to be done.
Well, this deep dive into Bruce Mendenhall, it's been a real eye-opener and a reminder that the world can be a dangerous place, but it's also a testament to human ingenuity, the dedication of law enforcement and our desire to seek justice and protect the innocent.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Hopefully, by understanding the complexities of these cases, we can learn from them and prevent future tragedies.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, stay curious, keep digging, and most importantly, stay safe out there.
Until next time. Until next time.